When Princess Anne stood before the council room doors that morning, no one imagined she held a centuries-old letter capable of unravelling the balance of royal power. But what came next wasn't just unexpected, it was catastrophic for Queen Camilla. A secret inheritance, concealed from public view and even from the reigning Queen Consort, was now exposed. And it bypassed Camilla entirely, sending shockwaves through the monarchy's most guarded halls. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. There are few moments in royal history that unfold not with ceremony but with calculated silence. And this was one of them. Anne didn't arrive with a fanfare, nor did she seek Charles's approval before she moved. With her usual resolute calm, she placed a sealed envelope, aged, brittle at the edges, onto the center of the council table. Every pair of eyes in that room understood instantly that this wasn't a formality, it was a reckoning. Inside the envelope was a document bearing the Queen's private seal, a seal thought long dormant since her passing. What emerged from its folds wasn't just ink on paper, it was a decree of inheritance, signed by Queen Elizabeth herself, outlining assets, titles, and responsibilities that would never reach Camilla's hands. The room shifted. Conversations froze mid-breath. What had been assumed to belong to the current Queen Consort had in fact been allocated years ago elsewhere. Anne read it aloud. Every name spoken echoed like a bell toll in the silent chamber. But Camilla's name never came. The inheritance had a very specific clause, one that described the assets as intended for direct bloodline protectors, a term Elizabeth had never used publicly, but clearly reserved for those she deemed the true guardians of Windsor's legacy. The list of inherited items wasn't symbolic, it was foundational. Royal lands linked to the lineage of Queen Mary, patronages rooted in wartime resilience, historical jewels passed down through 6 generations of sovereigns. All of it was to be handed to individuals who, as the letter emphasized, embody the continuity of royal purpose. Camilla's omission wasn't an oversight. It was a deliberate stroke. Her absence in the paperwork was glaring like a chapter torn from a book everyone thought she had written. The reaction was instant and visceral. Advisors glanced at one another, unsure whether to remain still or speak. Camilla sat motionless, her expression unreadable, but her stillness betrayed the weight of what she'd just witnessed. Her name wasn't forgotten, it was excluded, and not by error, but by design. Rumors sparked like flint behind closed doors. Was this a final insult from the late Queen, or had this plan been set in motion long before Camilla ever assumed her public role? Charles, normally the calm amid his family's storms, reportedly said nothing. For the first time since assuming the throne, he found himself caught between the monarchy's past and its fractured present. He didn't reach for his wife's hand. He didn't object to Anne's presentation. He simply stared, as though he too had just discovered the truth behind the carefully stitched veil of legacy. The balance of power had shifted, not by decree from the king, but by a voice long silenced. Elizabeth, even in death, had orchestrated one final act of sovereignty, and she'd chosen Anne, not Charles, to pull the curtain back. But what exactly did Queen Elizabeth hide so deeply, and why was Anne the one to unveil it, not Charles himself? Buried beneath 3 generations of royal archives was a codicil Queen Elizabeth never made public until Anne did. This document, thought to be destroyed or sealed for decades, was a thunderclap of betrayal. Its contents made one thing brutally clear: Camilla was never meant to inherit the legacy she believed was hers by right. For years, whispers of a private addendum to Queen Elizabeth's final wishes had circulated in hushed tones through palace corridors. But no one had seen it. Many assumed it had either been redacted or swallowed by bureaucracy after her passing. Yet in one unrelenting motion, Princess Anne disintegrated that myth. The codicil, dated precisely 10 years before Elizabeth's death, bore the Queen's unmistakable seal, weathered, but intact, and carried instructions more personal and piercing than any official proclamation. It was not addressed to the monarchy as an institution, but to Anne alone, revealing a chain of trust that left Camilla entirely in the dark. This was no gentle request. It was a meticulously crafted roadmap of legacy, one that placed Anne not just as witness, but as guardian. The contents were as unsettling as they were deliberate. Elizabeth, in her own words, expressed an unwavering commitment to preserving the direct bloodline of royal continuity and named specific heirlooms, titles and honours to be withheld from any consort not born into the Windsor line. Camilla was not only left out, she was explicitly bypassed. The Queen had marked certain legacies, including custodianship of the Queen Mother's archival jewels and sovereign trust directives, as exclusively reserved for either Anne or her chosen successor, pending the readiness of the rightful heir. It was a brutal blow to Camilla's perception of her place within the monarchy, and a calculated one. This was not a decision made in haste or emotion. It had been sealed a full decade before Elizabeth's passing and revisited during her final private meeting with Anne. In that final year, when the Queen's public appearances had grown fewer and her silence more commanding, Anne had reportedly spent more hours alone with her than any other family member. What seemed at the time to be routine care was, in fact, the cementing of a plan to ensure the Crown's true soul didn't wander off its intended path. Legal experts consulted after Anne revealed the codicil confirmed that the NT's language, though wrapped in gentle phrasing, was binding. There was no space for reinterpretation. It was a command, not a suggestion, and it left no room for Camilla to challenge it without appearing to oppose the Queen's final word. When the codicil was read aloud in its entirety, Camilla did not react publicly. Those inside the chamber later described her silence as cutting. She didn't speak. She didn't argue. She simply stood up, turned away and left the room. No words, no acknowledgement. Just the echo of her heels down the hallway as Anne remained, unmoved, her hands folded over the very papers that had just redrawn the lines of royal inheritance. It wasn't defiance, it was duty. And it was now irreversible. But this wasn't just a will, it was a whisper from the past. And soon the whispers turned into loud accusations. While the world believed Camilla sat comfortably on the throne of favour, behind palace walls, her world had begun to crack. Sources close to the inner circle describe her reaction as frighteningly calm, the kind of calm that conceals a storm. For Camilla, this wasn't just about jewels or estates. It was about being publicly humiliated by someone she had once dismissed. The moment the codicil surfaced, Camilla knew this wasn't an accidental reveal, it was a statement, a carefully orchestrated message from Anne that no longer played by the rules of quiet submission. That very evening, after Anne left the royal chamber, with her head held high and silence rippling through the corridors, Camilla demanded an urgent, private audience with King Charles. Not a meeting, not a conversation, a confrontation. Those closest to the king say she arrived unannounced and refused to leave until every door behind her was shut. For 37 minutes, not a single word escaped the gilded doors of the private study, but what happened inside would haunt the crown for weeks. Camilla emerged with red eyes and clenched fists, walking past aides without acknowledgement. Charles, moments later, was seen sitting alone, hands locked together in a posture not of authority but of defeat. What triggered Camilla's fury wasn't just the contents of the codicil, it was the timing. She reportedly believed Anne had waited until the Queen Consort was vulnerable, distracted with public obligations, to strike with surgical precision. Rumours quickly circulated that Camilla had tried to intervene just hours before Anne made her presentation. Desperate calls to legal advisors, last-minute attempts to delay the release. Even a request veiled as a suggestion to Charles that Anne's documents be reviewed by the Privy Council first. Every move was blocked, and every attempt made her position look weaker. Anne, knowing exactly how the palace functioned, had ensured there would be no room for redirection. It wasn't long before long-simmering tensions between Camilla and Anne reignited with a fury that staff could no longer ignore. Their Cold War, once hidden behind formalities and staged smiles, now erupted in closed-door silence. According to one source, the Queen Consort refused to attend a joint royal engagement when she learned Anne would also be present. Sophie, Countess of Wessex, allegedly stepped in to broker a private meeting to ease tensions, but Camilla, deep in her fury, refused. "She's made her choice," was the only sentence reportedly uttered before the conversation ended. Sophie, a woman known for her discretion, left the room looking shaken. And yet, it wasn't only behind palace walls where Camilla began to lose ground. Her allies in the press, once loyal and carefully coordinated, were reportedly instructed to suppress coverage of the codicil's implications. But by then it was too late. The story had broken beyond containment. Online platform. MS were ablaze with headlines questioning Camilla's future role. Social media turned ruthless. Commentators dissected every photograph, every sentence, every silence. The crown, already under pressure to modernize, now found itself in a cultural reckoning, one where legacy was no longer inherited, but earned. But the fire had already been lit, and Anne wasn't done. What came next would sever the myth of unity for good. For decades, Camilla believed she was next in line to access the Queen Mother's vault, a legendary trove of heirlooms, personal letters, and historical declarations. But when Anne produced the official access decree, it was like turning a key in Camilla's deepest insecurity. She hadn't been forgotten, she'd been bypassed. There were whispers about the vault for years, but its true contents were only known to a handful of trusted royals. Queen Mary's brooch, rumoured to be cursed with the weight of monarchs lost to scandal. Princess Margaret's tiaras, each piece symbolising defiance, legacy and sacrifice. And most coveted of all, Queen Elizabeth's personal correspondence letters never intended for the public, or even for the full royal household. These were not museum artifacts. They were fragments of the monarchy's soul, preserved for those the Queen deemed worthy of understanding the full weight of their lineage. Camilla had long assumed, as the Queen Consort, access would come naturally. But assumption in the House of Windsor is a dangerous game. The decree Anne revealed wasn't new. It had been signed over a year before Elizabeth's passing. Stamped with royal authority and laced with personal language, it named Princess Anne as the exclusive custodian of the vault. Not the king, not the Queen Consort, only Anne. The exclusion wasn't explained in public, but privately it echoed louder than any proclamation. The message was unmistakable. The late Queen had trusted Anne to protect the truth, and she had not entrusted Camilla with that same responsibility. Camilla was not merely left out. She was never considered. Inside the vault, according to palace insiders, were handwritten reflections entries by Queen Elizabeth, voicing her hopes, her warnings, and her doubts. Among them, lines questioning whether Camilla could ever grasp the gravity of generational preservation the way a blood daughter might. The very existence of these words, confirmed by a senior aide, sent tremors through the palace. The Queen hadn't written them for malice, but for clarity. And now, those lines had become weapons. Camilla's team scrambled. Her press secretary rushed to shape a narrative, telling select outlets that the omission was merely logistical, related to Anne's longer tenure within the inner sanctum. But no one bought it. Not the public, and certainly not the Windsors themselves. What shattered the illusion further was the quiet presence of Lady Louise. Observers caught her entering the vault under Anne's supervision. No fanfare, no announcement, just duty. That moment was symbolic. A generational shift was underway. The Queen's legacy was being entrusted not to the most visible face, but to the quiet, enduring hands of those who had long been underestimated. It wasn't only Camilla who was watching, the world was, and it didn't take long before the headlines exploded. Social media boiled over with hashtags questioning Camilla's authority. Was the Queen Mother's legacy being redirected away from the throne itself? Camilla's silence in the aftermath spoke louder than any statement. The woman who had weathered scandals, survived public backlash, and finally secured her crown was now facing a rejection deeper than any newspaper headline. She hadn't lost power, she'd lost the past. And in the monarchy, losing the past means forfeiting the feu. Toure. And while Camilla reeled from this revelation, another betrayal lay quietly in wait, this time involving the late Queen's private charity trust, when control over Queen Elizabeth's private charity trust was quietly transferred. No one expected it to go to anyone but Camilla. But buried within the transition files was another name, Catherine. And it wasn't a clerical error. It was deliberate and irreversible. The trust in question wasn't just another ceremonial fund. It was the Queen's most personal philanthropic legacy, founded in secrecy during the final years of her reign, operating quietly under a royal mandate that focused on causes Elizabeth held closest to her heart: rural education, single mothers of the Commonwealth, and post-war heritage restoration. For years, Camilla had been publicly linked to the Trust's initiatives. Her team had even begun drafting press materials and preparing events surrounding its new direction under her stewardship. But behind the scenes, another plan had already been written and signed without her knowledge. In a late-stage directive issued during the Queen's final months, trustee control was reassigned. The name replacing Camilla's wasn't even mentioned in hushed royal circles until the files were opened. It was Catherine. The shift was seismic. Over £80 million in assets, donor links, and long-term strategic partnerships were quietly redirected toward Catherine's foundation. What stunned royal aides most wasn't the scale of the transfer, it was the intent. The documents made no room for ambiguity. Catherine was not only named as the trustee, but was described as the chosen modern embodiment of continuity, a phrase that sent chills through Camilla's inner circle. Because unlike with the vault, this wasn't about history, it was about relevance. Legacy had found a new home, and it wasn't the Queen Consort's. Anne's name appeared again, this time not as a presenter, but as the official witness to the Queen's signature. Her involvement was unmistakable. By now the pattern could no longer be denied. Every move seemed coordinated, deliberate, and quietly executed with surgical precision. Camilla, blindsided yet again, scrambled. Her advisors attempted to push a media narrative framing the transition as symbolic and collaborative. But the financial disclosures told another story. None of the Trust's resources were left under her management. Not even advisory rights. As for Charles, his silence became heavier by the day. While reports confirmed he had been informed of the Trust's reassignment months prior, he neither contested it nor warned his wife. Instead, he retreated. Sandringham became his refuge, his absence from Windsor noted and whispered about in every hallway. A monarch uncertain of how to reconcile personal allegiance with maternal command. And in that vacuum of leadership, the fracture widened. Catherine, on the other hand, said nothing. She offered no interviews, no quotes, and no responses to inquiries. But her actions spoke louder than Camilla's pleas. New campaigns launched quietly under her foundation's banner. Old programs previously affiliated with the Queen were absorbed and rebranded. There was no gloating, no spectacle, just the cold, dignified assurance of someone who had been prepared long before the world realized. This was no longer about position, it was about purpose. Camilla had the title, but Catherine had been handed the mission, and now, with funds, influence, and public favor turning, the Queen Consort's authority looked increasingly ceremonial. She was present, yes, but she was no longer pivotal. But the true damage wasn't about money or jewels, it was about lineage. And Anne had saved the most devastating truth for last. Amid inheritance wars and trust betray, Anne stepped forward with a final revelation, one the late Queen had entrusted her with alone. There was another heir, not of blood, but of legacy. And their name wasn't Camilla, it was Princess Charlotte. In the aftermath of vault exclusions, redirected trust funds, and public silence from Buckingham, Anne made one final move that would redraw the royal map in a way no constitution had anticipated. From a weathered leather-bound folder, sealed in the Queen's private collection and untouched since Elizabeth's final weeks, Anne revealed a hidden proclamation. Not a public order, not a constitutional mandate, but a handwritten declaration marked with the words, "For the one who carries forward not the crown, but the conscience of the realm." The Queen had titled it herself the Heir of Moral Continuance, and it bore a name that no one expected in such a context, Charlotte Elizabeth Diana. In that moment, the conversation shifted. This was no longer about ceremonial hierarchy, it was about safeguarding the soul of the monarchy. Anne, speaking not with grandeur but with certainty, unveiled that Elizabeth had pre-assigned titles, heirlooms, and even personal letters to Charlotte in secret. Among them, the Royal Order of Devotion, Queen Victoria's quill used for Commonwealth correspondences, and a handwritten letter meant for Charlotte's 18th birthday sealed until the time came. These weren't items of pomp, They were quiet legacies, symbols of trust, guidance, and responsibility, and none of them had been earmarked for Camilla. The reason, though unspoken aloud in the proclamation, was made chillingly clear in the attached annotations. Camilla had been deemed unsuitable due to moral and historical divergence from the Crown's foundational expectations. In simpler terms, Elizabeth did not believe Camilla aligned with the core values she wanted passed forward. There was no room left for interpretation. Anne, now Charlotte's godmother and formal custodian of legacy, had accepted the responsibility to prepare the young princess for a future not written in legal terms, but spiritual ones. A future where influence would not be granted by proximity to power, but by inherited intent. Insiders reveal that when Charles first read the sealed proclamation in private, he broke down. This was not a betrayal by Anne, nor a political maneuver. It was the final will of his mother, unyielding, crystal clear, and steeped in emotional finality. There was no space to rewrite it, no argument to soften it. For a man who had fought decades for Camilla's place, this document erased her from the legacy conversation with the stroke of a fountain pen. And perhaps the most defining blow came not from Anne but from William. Without hesitation, he backed the move. His statement to the family, shared behind locked doors, was simple. This is what she would have wanted. And I stand with that. What followed was silence, not disagreement, not rebellion, just stunned, reverent stillness. Because what Elizabeth had done was not just pass on a title, she had passed on trust. And in a house built on power, trust is the most radical act of all. With history rewritten, the monarchy faced the one thing it feared most: public fallout. In the hours that followed the announcement, public opinion split like never before. Some rallied behind Anne, heralding her as the true keeper of the Queen's legacy. Others saw Camilla's exclusion as cruel and calculated. But the palace couldn't silence the storm. Not this time. Social media ignited within minutes. Hashtags like #AnneProtector and #Queen Charlotte surged through timelines, transforming a private royal revelation into a global cultural reckoning. Supporters of Anne framed her as the last loyal defender of the Crown's moral compass, the one woman who had stood beside the Queen not just in duty, but in depth of character. Charlotte, thrust into the public eye without a single word, became a symbol of the monarchy's possible redemption. But on the other side of the aisle, Camilla's defenders fought back. A wave of private messages, reportedly leaked by loyalists within her camp, found their way to the tabloids. Texts, emails, and diary excerpts painted Camilla as a woman devastated, betrayed by a family that had, until now, kept up the appearance of inclusion. Narrative fractured. Former royal aides who had remained silent for years stepped into the spotlight. Some confirmed the Queen's closeness to Anne and her long-held reservations about Camilla's symbolic place in history. Others claimed the late Queen's final decisions were the result of manipulation and selective access, hinting that Anne may have curated the Queen's final impressions in her most vulnerable moments. Debate panels exploded across networks. Royal calm. Mentators who had spent careers defending the institution now found themselves at odds, unsure whether to champion tradition or demand transparency. The public was no longer just watching, they were participating in rewriting the future of the monarchy. Inside Westminster, the ripple became a tremor. Parliament members, once content with royal matters staying ceremonial, issued direct calls to Charles. What was Camilla's standing now? Would she still represent the crown abroad? Should she still be regarded as queen in function or merely in title? The silence from Buckingham only intensified the confusion. Polling data revealed what the royal household feared most. The Queen Consort's public approval was in freefall. A figure once cautiously accepted now stood at the center of controversy, unable to reclaim the narrative. And in stark contrast to the noise, Catherine remained silent. No interviews, no comments, no expressions of allegiance or opposition. But her presence ever beside Anne during a series of private engagements spoke volumes. The imagery was impossible to ignore. The steadfast Princess Royal beside the woman who now commanded Elizabeth's legacy. No words were needed. The visual message to the public was clear. A quiet coronation of trust had taken place, and Camilla hadn't been invited to the circle that mattered most. What began as a sealed document had become a nation's public trial. And yet, in the whirlwind of debate, headlines, and declarations, one figure remained unheard. One voice that, for better or worse, still held the power to shift the entire balance of this unravelling dynasty. But amid the media frenzy, one voice had yet to be heard, and when it did, everything turned again. After days of silence, King Charles finally addressed the inheritance scandal. But his words did not bring peace, they brought questions. In trying to defend both Anne and Camilla, he appeared fractured, weary, and for the first time, dethroned by truth. Was this the beginning of his legacy's end? The broadcast was brief, but the weight behind each sentence was undeniable. Standing alone, his voice carried the hesitancy of a man torn between duty and despair. Charles began by acknowledging what the palace had tried to suppress, that Anne's revelations had legal grounding and moral authority. He confirmed the validity of the codicil, the vault decree, and the redirected trust. Each confirmation felt like a concession, but it was what he said next that deepened the fracture. He referred to Camilla's distress as deeply understandable and a matter of personal anguish, yet he emphasized, almost reluctantly, that his mother's final wishes must be respected not only as queen, but as the enduring soul of this institution. Those words, softly spoken, felt like a line drawn in the sand. Then he turned to the subject no one expected him to touch, Princess Charlotte. With barely veiled emotion, Charles spoke of a new generation rising with honor and grace. It was the closest he had come to publicly endorsing the Queen's secret proclamation. He did not name Charlotte outright, but his phrasing made it unmistakable. For many watching, that moment wasn't reassurance, it was surrender. The king, once a man who fought against tradition to secure Camilla's future, now stood nodding in submission to the past. Not even his own love could eclipse the Queen's final word. But if the words were heavy, the aftermath was heavier. During a scheduled appearance at a veterans' commemoration event, Charles and Camilla stood side by side for the cameras. The smiles were faint, the space between them a chasm. Observers noted the Queen Consort's clenched jaw and Charles's distracted gaze. A single moment captured on camera, where Camilla reached for his hand and he gently withdrew, spread across every tabloid and television screen in Britain. The fairy tale facade had cracked, and there was no salvaging it. Within royal circles, whispers turned into murmurs. Some questioned if the strain was too much, too soon. That perhaps the crown now demanded a younger, more unburdened face. And while no official word emerged, palace insiders hinted that talks of transition had quietly resumed. Speculations of abdication, once dismissed, returned with urgency. Yet it wasn't Charles's silence that gripped the nation next. It was Anne's. Following the king's address, the Princess Royal vanished from public sight. No engagements, no statements, no sightings for 48 hours. Her absence, eerily timed, prompted questions no one could answer. Had she gone into retreat? Had she been asked to step back? Or was she preparing for something else entirely? The king had spoken, but clarity remained elusive. The storm that had started with one document now swirled into something larger, an uncontainable reckoning. Power had not just been questioned, it had been redistributed. And no throne, no matter how gilded, could resist the pull of irreversible momentum. But even Charles's address couldn't stop the tidal wave Anne had unleashed. One final ceremony would cement the irreversible shift. No fanfare, no golden throne, just a whispered blessing in the Queen's private chapel. That's how Anne sealed what Camilla could never undo. With Catherine and Charlotte standing beside her, she placed the legacy crown in its rightful hands, not of power, but of purpose. It happened quietly, away from flashing cameras and ceremonial horns. Windsor's private chapel, once used for private reflection by Queen Elizabeth herself, now became the stage for a moment far more consequential than any coronation balcony wave. Authorized by Charles, but orchestrated by Anne, the ceremony was held with a single purpose: to fulfill the Queen's final vow that the legacy she built, protected and preserved, would continue only through those she believed understood its weight. No priests, no trumpets, just the echo of unshakable intent. Anne, known throughout her life for her silence and strength, now stepped into the role of generational bridge. In her hands was the Queen's family ring, passed down through generations not by law, but by choice. It had never belonged to Camilla, and it never would. With quiet conviction, she turned to Charlotte and placed it upon her finger, declaring not a title but a charge, to protect what others had tried to possess. Charlotte, barely of age to understand the political storm swirling around her, didn't need to say a word. Her presence was the answer. She was the embodiment of continuity, not because of her bloodline, but because of the legacy Elizabeth had seen within her. Beside her, Catherine stood tall, not in triumph, but in readiness. And in a gesture even more symbolic, Anne took from her own pocket the Queen Mother's brooch apiece. Long believed to have been promised to Camilla, and fastened it onto Catherine's dress. The message was unmistakable. Camilla had worn the title, but Catherine had inherited the trust. The weight of that decision echoed far beyond those stone chapel walls. For a monarchy so often criticized for clinging to outdated symbols, this was a resurrection of purpose. A reminder that legacy does not always follow blood, it follows belief. Camilla was not present. Her absence, though unconfirmed officially, was whispered throughout the palace. She had retreated into seclusion, reportedly unavailable for the foreseeable future. No statement was released, no explanation offered, but none was needed. Her silence was the final act in a saga where she had been present at the table but never truly at the center, and now that table had been reset. When the public announcement finally emerged, it came not from the press office, but as a royal seal marked beneath a single line. The legacy endures through those chosen in silence. A line written, it is said, by Queen Elizabeth herself. It was not a rebuke of Camilla, it was the closing of a chapter that had long waited for its final page. Anne had done what no council, no parliament, and no throne could. She restored the crown's moral centre without shouting a word. She had handed the torch not to the loudest, nor the most public, but to those who carried their purpose in silence and strength. The monarchy had been shaken, but its heart had been restored, and at the centre of it all was Anne, unmovable, unbreakable, and finally, undeniable. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.